Hello and welcome to Movie Marathon Mood. It's the show where we watch a bunch of movies, then we talk about them. It's as simple as that. And on this episode, part 4 of our 007 Marathon, the only episode that we're going to have all Roger Moore movies. We've had one that was all Sean Connery. This one's all Roger Moore. We have The Spy Who Loved Me, Moonraker, and For Your Eyes Only. Interesting dissection of the types of movies that Roger Moore made. We'll talk about them all right here on Movie Marathon Mood. Stick around.
It's the biggest. It's the best. It's Bond. And beyond.
Watch out!
Jesse Gilstrap here, joined once more with my buddy Drew Cordell. Drew, how's it going?
Hello there. Going excellently, Jesse. How about yourself?
Going well. So we got triple feature in this episode that's entirely Roger Moore. One time that we get to do an episode that's entirely Roger Moore, partially because he made enough of them that we can do that very easily.
Right.
But yeah, we go immediately into The Spy Who Loved Me first. And what I think is interesting from the jump, talking about Spy Who Loved Me, is the fact that the previous film, The Man with the Golden Gun, didn't exactly, blow the roof off the place. It was a little disjointed. It didn't do tremendously well. And yet at the same time, they doubled down and had an even bigger budget. And, just basically just went all out for The Spy Who Loved Me. And ended up making a return on the movie, making a whole lot of money. I guess their plan worked out, but I think it's kind of fascinating that they made that turn
Right.
and said, no, this is exactly the direction that we're going in. Whereas, like we saw in the Sean Connery era, they made very different decisions when things didn't exactly go according to plan, at least at some points.
Right.
But I guess they were really happy with Roger Moore as their guy and paid out in dividends. But I'll turn it over to you, my friend, and see what you have to say about this next adventure for Roger Moore as Bond.
I was, I knew I had seen it a long time ago, and I knew that I liked it because there were things I definitely remembered. Obviously, the the car slash submarine sequence is one of the most iconic things from it, and I did remember that, and I remembered Jaws.
Yeah, how could you forget one of the biggest henchmen? Yeah.
Right, right. I remembered that. I specifically remembered kind of the first time you see Jaws in action in Egypt, and just some of those things I remembered very well. But the rest of it, it had been so long, I didn't remember much about Stromberg or Atlantis or really the plot in general. And I was pleasantly surprised that I kind of loved this one quite a bit. We mentioned Lewis Gilbert, who directed You Only Live Twice, and he directed this and Moonraker, and he has a certain mindset for his Bond films that I really like. In that he kind of really doubles down on the spectacle and the tropes with the gadgets and the large base, something spectacular. And I really enjoy kind of his where his head goes with that. And it's really interesting because Spy Who Loved Me is very much the story itself. It's a combination of some of the stories we've seen before. Plot wise, it's very similar to You Only Live Twice in that instead of space shuttles and satellites getting gobbled up, we have boats and submarines from Russia and the United States getting attacked instead. It's a similar storyline, but it's done in a fresh way, and I like it. And when you get to this is what the 10th Bond film at this point. that you're going to recycle some certain plot elements after a while, and as long as you keep it fresh and like I said, and you're that far into it, you're going to run into some recycling, and it's what you do with it that matters. And I think that kind of pairing that with almost a From Russia with Love style story as well, where you have Agent Triple X, who is a Russian spy that Bond has to team up with. And, in the opening, he actually killed her lover in a, really fun opening sequence with a ski escape and, him turning around and hitting him with almost like a harpoon coming out of his ski brace there. It's just a, kind of a fun opening scene. Of course, the Union Jack parachute, everything. That's another iconic stunt. I didn't remember that was specifically from this movie, but I remembered that image. And, it's just a fun, it's a fun movie. I really enjoyed Stromberg. I think he could have been a little bit more developed, but the idea of kind of this, we these next two movies, we kind of like have an antithesis of the types of villains that were in these kind of Bond movies before, where you had like Spectre and their evil uh, megalomaniacs and hell bent on extortion and global domination. This is something different. Stromberg wants to purge the world of the chaos and destruction, almost a eco terrorist in a way, that he wants to cleanse the world in a flood and have an underwater city, Atlantis, for the ones worthy of surviving. It's an interesting take. So we got kind of two postmodern Bond villains in these two movies here, with the more spectacular kind of classic types of tropes it mixed together with that. I really kind of enjoyed that. It makes for something different. Jaws, we I've already mentioned him, but he makes for a great henchman. There's a reason why they brought him back. He was popular, of course, and memorable, and he's easily one of the most iconic henchmen or villain, just characters besides Bond in general from the whole series. And the metal teeth and just being seemingly indestructible. And Roger Moore is very good at kind of being Bond that's calm in difficult situations. He, keeps a cool head. Yes, a lot of people can take that as tongue in cheek, that he just, oh, this is all silly winks, smile. And in some ways, he does that in some of these movies, but I don't necessarily think he does it in Spy Who Loved Me. I think he takes it seriously enough, but he also does it in a way that's charming and that wins you over. And it's just a fun experience, and you can tell he had fun being James Bond, and that he loved being James Bond, and that makes this, and really even the ones that I maybe don't enjoy as much as this one, so much fun to sit through because of him. But he does a great job in this one. I think he was Bond. He had his version of Bond pretty much set in stone from Live and Let Die, and we talked about that quite a bit. That he was able to just kind of take off running. But I feel like he was very much in his stride here in this film. I don't have a lot negative to say about this one. I think the only things that I would say negative is that the things that I love could have been better. There's the whole story with Agent Triple X and Bond, and that he killed her lover, and they're forced to work together, and they have chemistry, and obviously there's a love story that develops there. But there's also kind of a point where she swears revenge on her lover that was killed at the beginning, that she is going to kill Bond, and it's kind of abandoned. I mean, he goes and rescues her, and it's kind of just tossed away. I didn't want her to hate him, but it's not really resolved. It's just kind of shrugged off. And Stromberg could have been in it more. He has a cool motivation, but he kind of plays it very one note. He acts a lot like a Blofeld, and I was reading up on it after I watched it, and initially they wanted Bond or the villain to be Blofeld, but because of rights issues that stem from Thunderball, which we will talk more in detail about next episode, they were unable to use the Spectre and Blofeld and other characters coming from Thunderball because of some rights issues. So they came up with an entirely new character. And like I said, he's a very interesting villain, but there could have been a little bit more. I do think they may have put more energy into developing Jaws into something cool than Stromberg, and that's fine. I just would have liked, maybe a little something to kind of just make him pop a little bit more than some of the other villains, make him stand out a little bit more. But overall, I feel like Spy Who Loved Me is probably the best Roger Moore Bond film. It's got some great action scenes. It's got some really great locations. I mean, we end up in Egypt and place underwater, and I would be remiss if I didn't talk about the climax. Like a huge battle ensues, and you got Bond with these soldiers, some Americans on a submarine that he commandeers, and some of the American or British and Russians who were captured earlier on. See, it kind of takes what Gilbert did and You Only Live Twice in that volcano layer and like amps it up even further. And I really enjoyed that quite a bit. I found myself very much into that. Another little thing that you kind of see that Gilbert did, and I just love his headspace, is that he will appropriate locations as MI6 headquarters. They will just be all over the place. Like we talked about the submarine in You Only Live Twice. They do stuff similar to that here. And I like kind of the Commander Bond outfit with him with like a naval officer uniform. I just there's just a lot of touches to this one that I just really enjoy. Like I said, there are just a few things that I wish were a little bit more. But this is a strong top 006 out of 007. It would, if it had some of those other elements just a little bit stronger, I would give it a solid, absolutely 007 out of 007. It's really close. But this is definitely, I think, thus far, and I don't really see this changing unless just, an act of God or something makes me like Octopussy or View to a Kill a lot more than I think I do. But Spy Who Loved Me is definitely my favorite of these movies that we've watched so far.
And it's Roger Moore's favorite movie that he did as well, which is obvious enough, I suppose.
Right, right.
But and I know you already know, and I've said it before, but Spy Who Loved Me is one of my personal favorite Bond movies, and so not a surprise that I would still give it a 007 uh, perfect score. I loved it once more watching it through. Like the visual style of the movie is utterly fantastic,
It really is.
and the cinematographer. I'm not 100% sure how you pronounce his name, but Claude Renoir. He had been in the business for a very long time, old hand, and one of the better visual Bond movies. And the ending though, like, actually had to be assisted, uncredited by Stanley Kubrick, because Claude Renoir, his eyesight was going bad, and they needed some assistance, and they have this incredibly large set, and Kubrick helped them out, which I think is just a really cool
Yeah.
little factoid. One of my favorite filmmakers involved with Bond in some little way. But gosh, there's just so much. that I love about the movie, and obviously I don't begrudge you your opinion uh, on what you think is you wish were just a little better, but those things personally don't bother me. I actually think Stromberg is a terrific villain, and on top of that, you have Jaws, who's one of the best henchmen, and it just like to me that balance is just like an ideal balance of everything that you might want from a Bond movie, and that's ultimately what one of the things that Spy Who Loved Me has for me is like it has this combination of elements that just all kind of sings together on just the right temperature, just the right level of absurdity, the right level of taking itself seriously as a strong Bond girl, but also one like you mentioned that uh, has motivation that you can kind of follow, and you can imagine different realities where it pushed more serious or pushed more absurd one way or the other. To me, I like I said, I like that balance. That opening ski stunt too is one that they were going to do in On Her Majesty's Secret Service,
Right.
but where he has the parachute and they couldn't pull it off in On Her Majesty's Secret Service, so they used it here. So you obviously have some aspect of them kind of going all out. Like I mentioned, they just doubled down on Roger Moore's Bond, made it a big movie, made it large in scope, and like we're gonna throw everything at the wall, and that's Lewis Gilbert too.
Oh yeah.
For whatever reason, he's their guy for kind of going all out. But I feel like he did an even better job on this movie than he did on his previous Bond movie. I mean, You Only Live Twice is crazy fun, but this one has that this kind of extra flavor to really take it over the top. Yeah, I that one of the things that I love the most too, and this is just a thing in the finale with Jaws and Shark Tank, which is a big trope in Bond movies, of course. Any great villain has to have their Shark Tank. But the whole sequence when Bond uses the magnet and gets captures Jaws and drops him down in there, and that's already fun enough. But then, of course, Jaws attacks Jaws, so to speak.
Right.
Um, and that's just the extra juice on top. Um, Jaws being this kind of unstoppable presence, which we'll definitely talk about more when we get to the next movie. But in The Spy Who Loved Me, I think it's just utterly fantastic. Like he's a great baddie, a great henchman. I don't know. I don't know how much more I want to necessarily elaborate, except to say like I love the Egyptian flavor too, having those unique styles pop up, and that's something you have in You Only Live Twice as well as the Japanese flavor. Bond is often this globe-trotting adventure and going to exotic locales, even if MI6 headquarters can pop up anywhere that they just want it to pop up. I'm glad you brought it up because if you didn't, I definitely was going to bring it up. I don't know why that's a Lewis Gilbert thing, but it's fantastic. Yeah, this is probably not just Moore's best movie as Bond, but probably his best performance as Bond as well. And another thing I like in the movie is actually the music. I don't know what your take on the music is, but I really like the flavor of it.
I it's interesting that you mention it because I was just thinking I should have talked about my thoughts on the music, and I was like, well, maybe I'll talk about it later for your eyes only because because it's two different composers, but they take different approaches of the same idea, and I feel like the composer on Spy Who Loved Me does a much better job of kind of it's very 70s vibrant. It's not exactly disco music, but it has kind of those beats mixed with the Bond themes and the themes of the film. And I think it works. It's not my favorite thing, but it very much fits this movie and I enjoyed it. And I also really enjoy Nobody Does It Better. Carly Simon, it's a great song. I don't know, beforehand, when I just heard it kind of out of the context of the movie because it's been so long, I thought, well, it's a good song. I just don't think of it as a Bond song, but it fits this film. I just that thing that was something I was meaning to mention is that normally I wouldn't like this idea of kind of like taking the score and making it way too contemporary, but I feel like there's enough in this one that kind of doesn't do it. It makes it feel right for this movie and not just, oh, this is a Bond movie in the 70s. And it has its own kind of flavor to it. I do enjoy that about it quite a bit, actually. And yeah, and you're right. Jaws killing the shark was great. Another, I read, I don't know how much truth there is to it, but at one point they were looking at Spielberg to direct this, um, who of course had just exploded with Jaws. And I'm trying to imagine Spielberg directing a Bond movie, and I think it would be great. But just trying like having him have a scene with Jaws against a shark, I think that would have been hilarious. But I'm glad that that didn't come to pass, and that this is the film we have because I really do enjoy it. That tidbit that you mentioned about Kubrick, I knew that I didn't know the exact details. I knew he worked on it, or uncredited worked on it and helped out. That's really, that is a cool detail. Admit it or not, he's one of the greatest filmmakers of all time, and that for him to even have like done anything on a Bond film is just a cool fact. And I can tell, there's an attention to detail in this movie that isn't necessarily in some of the other Bond movies, especially of the time.
So a 006 from you and a 007 perfect score from me, but relatively similar feelings uh,
Right,
when it gets down to it, relatively speaking. But mentioning Spielberg makes me want to transition into Moonraker, actually, just because there's actually a Spielberg reference in Moonraker.
yes.
If you recall, they used the Close
Yeah,
Encounters music, actually got permission to use that as a code,
right,
which is a fun little moment in Moonraker, but it's also like a moment that says that Spielberg had been communicating with them about working on a Bond film.
right,
So it's actually funny that it's in a Bond movie, basically, that connection all the way to the fateful meeting between Lucas and Spielberg to lead into Raiders of the Lost Ark.
right.
But they definitely had been considering working together. And at the same time, I had to say there's no way Spielberg would have ever made Moonraker. Um,
From the most exotic locations on Earth, Moonraker will transport you to another world.
Could this possibly be the moment for us to pool our resources?
We would be better off working together.
More excitement, more thrills, more spills.
What's that?
An entire city in space.
James Bond and the treacherous Dr. Goodhead.
one of the things that's crazy about Moonraker from the jump, talked about Spy Who Loved Me having a much larger budget than before. Moonraker has an incredibly large budget, though. It's the largest budget, even adjusted for inflation, that they had to that point. And now I'm trying to recall. I think that's changed since then. But obviously, they were trying to compete with Star Wars, and that was the whole idea. Because at the end of Spy Who Loved Me, they said Bond will return in For Your Eyes Only,
Yeah,
and at the end of Moonraker, they say Bond will return in For Your Eyes Only,
right,
and it was actually true in Moonraker. I guess it's technically true in Spy Who Loved Me,
right.
because he did eventually return in For Your Eyes Only. But no, the budget for the movie was incredibly large for the time, double the budget of Spy Who Loved Me, and I, I think it's all on the screen. That's for sure. Even though it's certainly no Star Wars in terms of its visual effects impact, but just that last 30 minutes alone, where Bond is actually in space, which is something worth pointing out. It's only the last 30 minutes that's even in space, which is still significant, but it's just filled with laser blasts and craziness and some zero gravity stuff, and a lot of it doesn't make any physical sense. Um, it's not exactly handled as delicately as you should handle something if you really cared about making a space movie.
No,
And Jaws returning as a henchman just because he latches on to the next big bad for whatever reason. I guess they have a headquarters. Certainly not Spectre because of the aforementioned rights issues, but uh, yeah, Jaws is like, oh, I'm gonna go over here to this bad guy now that I need to go on to a new bad guy.
right.
And but not only that, but
It's kind of like a John Wick.
yeah, exactly. There's some type of thing going on for sure that's never spoken of, but it's clearly happening.
Right,
But you have this absolutely Looney Tunes vibe going on between Bond and Jaws, where Jaws is basically the Roadrunner, surviving the most ludicrous moments in here. Like he was a force to be reckoned with in Spy Who Loved Me and Moonraker. He's indestructible. It might have been fun to see even more of him, obviously, but so it goes. What we get is fun, but it's obviously still very absurd, and I think that speaks to the vibe in Moonraker that takes itself a little too not seriously. Because to me, The Spy Who Loved Me has the perfect calibration, and Moonraker goes too far on the absurdist edge. And once again, Lewis Gilbert, so he definitely is capable of that absurdity and not afraid of that absurdity. But at the same time, like why are we doing this
right,
to this degree? I guess. But that all being said, and here's the turn is that I actually think Moonraker is not the worst movie. It has this reputation as being the worst Bond movie by many, and I definitely don't think it's the worst Bond movie. I don't think it's the worst Bond movie we've watched so far, Thunderball, and I I don't love it. I think it's probably gonna be in my bottom 007 when we get to that point, but it's not gonna be the worst of the worst. I think it has way more pluses to it than people often give it credit for. There's fun to be had even where it doesn't always take itself seriously enough. A lot of globe-trotting adventure that's actually pretty fun, I think, and enjoy watching it. Like it's I don't know. It's I'm curious. I might turn it over to you just for a little bit just to see where you stand. But I think I would land on a 005 for Moonraker. It's actually not the worst movie. It's fun to watch sometimes, even when it's being stupid.
right.
But yeah, what I'll turn it to you. What do you think?
Well, we're. I'm just gonna go ahead and drop the shocker. We are unanimous on this 005 because that's where I landed with it as well. I hadn't seen it perhaps even longer than I hadn't seen Spy Who Loved Me, and I don't know the things I remembered about it. I don't know if it was just a combination of maybe when I saw it, I just wasn't ready for what it is, or I didn't know, what to expect from it. And maybe I thought it should have been more in space
Oh yeah,
because I
great. Yeah.
was pretty young when I saw it last. Maybe I thought it was boring until the space parts. I don't remember what I didn't like about it. I just remember that I didn't like it, and kind of the combination of that and remembering, or not remembering, but it just having the reputation of being one of the worst ones. I figured, well, my memory probably serves me well on this. I remember it being pretty bad. A lot of people say it's pretty bad. So I go back and watch it, and I've been pretty fair about trying to give all of these movies a chance, especially ones I didn't like Thunderball. I tried to watch it with an open mind, but if something's not good, it's not good, and but it's a little bit of a different experience with Moonraker for me because I actually enjoyed it quite a bit, and like you said, we'll just kind of jump to that last. The visuals in the last 40 minutes of the movie, like from the temple
Right.
to where they blast the shuttles off, just that room, that control room,
Oh, it's neat.
is it looks so good.
Yeah.
It's such a it's such a cool visual image, and I kind of love that absurd because when it goes full absurd, it embraces it and it just takes off and it doesn't even have time to wink at you. It just keeps going. And I kind of really enjoy that about it. It is stupid and it is silly, but it's very confident in that, and I think that kind of pays off because it doesn't change the fact that it's stupid, but it makes it very fun to watch. And I did think it was absolutely ludicrous that with no buildup other than like in Q Branch, there was one laser being tested, but they don't mention it as being like the standard weaponry of the U.S. Air Force. But when we just randomly have this battle in space and these the American astronauts just pull these laser rifles out, and the people working for Drax have lasers as well. It makes absolutely no sense that they have this weaponry and they're choosing to like float in space and shoot each other. But it is magnificent to watch, and the visuals of the lasers going back and forth. I love that. I had to take some pictures of it from my phone while watching it because it was just it's a beautiful image in the goofiest way possible. But I just love that. Drax. We'll talk about him a little bit. He looks like a full size Peter Dinklage. They have the same cadence, the way they talk. I had to get on Wikipedia and see if like he's Peter Dinklage's father, which he is not, sadly enough. I enjoyed his character a little bit. I did think it was you were talking about Jaws, and it's almost kind of a John Wick thing that they just have like these killers they just hire like that. I guess there's a henchman agency or something, and they just hang around looking for work, which that would be a fun Bond movie, I think, to explore that.
Not even with Bond. I just want to see the henchman hanging out.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. He Drax. Okay, he's like the '70s Elon Musk. He is this multi-billionaire that loves building rockets and shuttles and decides he's going to make this utopia in the heavens in space and decides to steal one of the rockets that he built for NASA, steals it back for his plans. It's an interesting story. I like the vibe of both of these villains, Stromberg and Drax, for these movies because it's different than what we've seen before. Whereas, like you think, oh, it's going to be just like Blofeld or something else. Like the images, sure, the trappings, yeah, but like the actual motivations, it's very different than that. And I really enjoy that about them. But why in the world is some Japanese kendo enthusiast his right hand man? Like it does not fit. And like the fight scene was cool with Bond and I think his name's Chaw. It was a cool fight scene. I really enjoyed it. But again, what in the world? Like he's just random. He's always in a gi. Bruce Lee was popular in that time in the 70s. Martial arts films in general were.
So why not mix that with Star Wars?
Right. Yep. Star Wars. Let's just have this Japanese guy like be his main henchman for half the movie, and then of course when his time's up, so to speak, Drax is like, oh, I need somebody else, and then Jaws just shows up. He's like, oh, you'll do. So it's really kind of strung together that Jaws is even in this, but I enjoy it's very stupid and silly. It kind of runs with that. Here we've got another Bond girl that she's actually we got a pretty solid list of Bond girls, I think, in these three films because they're not really stupid.
Yeah, not the airheads we had in the last episode.
No, no. Of course, the name here we have Dr. Holly Goodhead, of course. But no, she's very competent. She's smart about her work, and
She's got a good head on her shoulders.
she randomly knows some martial arts. Why not? And again, everyone's just cool with using laser guns at the end of this movie. It's like they're throwing a bunch of things at a wall and just slinging things at a wall to see what sticks. And in Spy Who Loved Me, they just happen to you know, throw the right things. And then this one, it's like somebody gave them a dumpster to pick stuff up from, and that's what they used to throw at the wall. And it shouldn't be as fun to watch as it is. Like, I, you can take that as a compliment or not. I should hate it probably. I should think it's the worst maybe. But the way that they accomplish it and the way that they handle it makes it work better than it should.
And isn't that the point, really?
Or it is. It really is. At the end of the day, these movies were made to entertain, and they do that for the most part. And the ones that aren't as good don't. And this one, I definitely no, it's not the worst Bond movie. It's not the worst Roger Moore movie, and it's not even the worst movie or the least. I hate to say worst because it makes it sound like something's awful, but like it's not even gonna have the lowest rating out of the three movies that we watched from me. I enjoyed it quite a bit. 005, it's what works is great, and what's fun is a blast to watch. There are obviously it does not, like you said, it doesn't have the same balance as Spy Who Loved Me, where there's enough serious things to keep it balanced. It's very, very goofy, very silly, but again, it's confident enough in its silliness to pull it off. So, and again, John Barry returns to score this one, and that's always fun. Sometimes he knocks the like. I love John Barry, and obviously, like whenever he's going to do the score, I'm very excited. This one wasn't as. The score wasn't as memorable to me as some of the other ones, but it did have a return of some of his older themes and stuff. And again, I have to point something out. I erroneously said that Shirley Bassey did The Man with the Golden Gun. That was actually an artist named Lulu, who kind of has that same sound. But Shirley Bassey didn't return until Moonraker. And this is her weakest of the three that she's done, but it's not a bad song. But it's not as good as Goldfinger, which is obviously one of, if not the best, and Diamonds Are Forever, which is also an amazing Bond song. I enjoyed the score to Spy Who Loved Me more than I did the score for Moonraker, and that's even with John Barry involved. As and you have to think, everything was going to space at that point. Either franchises that didn't go into space before, or franchises were being created to be space related. In that same summer, you had Star Trek, the motion picture, you had Alien. The year before, you had Superman the movie, which quite a bit of that film is spent on Krypton. So you have a lot of these movies that are kind of competition. Maybe Moonraker could have been done better, but I really enjoy it's kind of um, enjoy it for what it is. It's just kind of a blast to sit and experience.
I had to say too, in regards to Drax, that I actually think he's a terrific villain. I really like the Noah's Ark,
Yeah,
you know, plot, the idea of creating a perfect utopia, and one of the things that shouldn't work, turning Jaws into a good guy basically just because of a letter, um, a letter from a kid who said that they liked Jaws and thought he should be a good guy, um, and then they actually did it. That shouldn't work, and yet it does, and it's in large measure because of the plot line. It has a logic to it that Jaws would be protective
right,
of his very silly girlfriend. But uh, I think it's also worth, and the idea that he has a girlfriend is extra cartoonish for him.
yes,
But I think it's worth mentioning too that this is actually the last novel that hadn't been adapted yet from Ian Fleming's works. And ironically was the one that Ian Fleming was trying to make into a movie first, and it just didn't happen. And they weren't even trying to make it until Star Wars was a you know behemoth, and they wanted to replicate it. It's just kind of weird that that's the trajectory that Moonraker as a property took, and obviously the storyline was changed a lot, like a lot of them from what Ian Fleming wrote, but nonetheless, it's interesting that this isn't just some silly. That's part of the reason it works, as much as it even does, is because it's not that they just decided let's put Bond in space because of Star Wars. They actually had a somewhat of a basis for doing this storyline, and it's not the craziest thing in the world for Bond to be in space. Lewis Gilbert had already been in space uh, a little bit before. We've had Bond have stuff happening in space, just not as much action as obviously is happening in Moonraker in space, which is uh, quite wild. We can't end our discussion on Moonraker though without referencing Bernard Lee,
oh yes, of
who
course.
ends his run as M in this movie. He was going to be in our next movie, For Your Eyes Only, but during production had to bow out and ended up passing away at that time. But uh, his last moment on screen happens to be a humorous and pretty ideal one in a lot of ways. Just him, 007, just chastising Bond for, of course, being caught on candid camera, so to speak. All the government peering in from, for whatever reason, from different angles, the cameras that are
Right.
there in that shuttle. But while Bond is attempting re-entry there in space, yeah.
Yes, the classic Q line of yeah, that. And it seems like all of these Roger Moore movies end on that kind of note, or a lot of them do, with, of course, Bond having sex, and then everyone trying to get in contact with him at that time. And obviously, that happened in Spy Who Loved Me. It happened in this one. It happens to a degree in the next one as well. This one is probably the funniest, and like you said, the fact that it was Bernard Lee's last, I could tell watching it, even though knowing it was his last one, you could tell he wasn't feeling well. He wasn't looking well in that one in particular. It wasn't just him looking old; he just didn't look well. There's a lot of these characters, these mainstays of the series, like Bernard Lee's M, or Moneypenny. It's kind of sad to watch them grow older as the series progresses. And I think it's in the next one where Moneypenny is kind of like really dressing herself up for Bond, who Roger Moore is old too, but we're supposed to believe that he's like a younger, character. But it's just it's one of those things. It's kind of hard, to think about. And knowing that Bernard Lee's last movie was upon me, it kind of hit me. He had a great run as that character. He established what this kind of straight man role is for this series. Someone that kind of, who would be in charge of Bond, what they would be like. And, we've had multiple M's now uh, since. And it's going to be interesting to see this next actor that plays, who actually appeared as a different character in Spy Who Loved Me. This was a good send off for him. And I enjoyed kind of going into the next one. I enjoyed the fact that he is not in it. The character is not, that there is a little gap between him being in the movies, and he's mentioned being away in For Your Eyes Only. But I like that they just didn't instantly replace him. That they kind of wrote him out of the movie. I enjoyed that.
For your eyes only. It's Roger Moore as Ian Fleming's James Bond 007.
This movie in general, uh, I'm very conflicted about, because there's a lot of things that I like about it, and there's a lot of things I don't. And the first, I'm gonna go ahead and do be harsh. And Bill Conti is a great composer. He did the Rocky films. He's done a lot of great work. His take on Bond here, it doesn't really fit to me. It doesn't work or fit the picture, because this is actually trying to be a more serious Bond film than the previous two. But it doesn't really work with that kind of disco style music. And the Bond song I wasn't a big fan of, by Sheena Easton, I think. And oddly, uh, she is on screen singing it for the opening title, which is kind of weird. And Julian Glover as Christados could have been a great fit. He's a great actor. That more famous for being Donovan and Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, and Grand Maester Pycelle and Game of Thrones, and General Veers and Empire Strikes Back. He's a good actor, and he's not bad in this movie. I really liked that he was kind of that it wasn't just set up from the beginning that he was the villain. It was revealed, and that he was kind of playing this double-edged role. But they never really did anything with that. As soon as Columbo, Topol's character is introduced, it just, instantly flips and he's the villain, and there's not much to make him stand out other than being the bad guy in this movie. And then you have I can't even think, BB, the ice skater, who for some reason is in this movie. I don't really know why, but she is flirting with Bond, and he turns her down because of, I guess, her age. I don't know. It's kind of like, this one is more frustrating to me than Man with the Golden Gun, because Man with the Golden Gun, what what is right is like spot on 100%, and then there's a lot of stupid stuff that kind of throws it off. This one, I like the idea and the direction of it, but it never really like lands like right on, and then there's just so much stupid stuff in it. Like, it wants to be a serious one. It wants to be like a more kind of edgy take, like Roger Moore pushes a guy off a cliff in a car, which is not the kind of violence you see in a Roger Moore Bond film. And it happens in this one. And I can't really tell you why it happens in this one, other than, there's a little bit of a. They were pushing to. John Glenn was the director of this one, his first, and he does the next of the canon Bond films. He does the next four that follow. I like some of his ideas. Obviously, Moonraker was a hit, and Spy Who Loved Me was a hit. They were, two huge Bond films, and there was a general consensus to kind of scale back a little bit, which I like that idea, and they do to a degree. You open up with one of the most absurd opening pre-title sequences, which in turn feels like it's trying to bring a little seriousness back when Bond's visiting his grave at the grave of Tracy from On Her Majesty's Secret Service. And I'm like, oh, okay. And then a conspicuously disguised, obviously it's Blofeld, but it might as well be Doctor Evil because it's just ridiculous.
And played by Mike Myers, actually.
The voice cracks me up so much. Mr. Bond. Uh, that whole sequence is ludicrous. But I thought, well, maybe they were trying to get that out of the way at the beginning to make something more serious. And in some ways, I like the storyline of this one. You have the ATAC system. It's kind of a submarine codes and everything. Someone attacks the ship and sinks it, and Christados and is trying to sell it to the Russians. A Greek archaeologist and his wife are murdered, and their daughter is the Bond girl in this film. And I kind of liked the idea of her story, where she's set up to go on revenge and kill the people that killed her parents, and then to keep digging deeper. And there's kind of this thing where Bond is trying to tell her, "Don't seek revenge. I've done that in my life." Kind of gives her like a proverb about dealing with revenge and what it does to you. And the idea of that, and the Bond films, some films tackle this idea a lot better down the line. But the idea of that is very strong. The execution, not so much, because she continues to be in the movie and it kind of feels like she's strung along, because the movie kind of goes back and forth from it's very driven with the plot to where it feels like, okay, we're going to the next phase, and then we get hung up on um, stupid thing about that ice skater BB. All of a sudden, oh, here she is. Here's the girl from earlier. It just it feels kind of disjointed to me. Like I said, Topal is the best thing about this movie. I really liked his character. I really liked Columbo. I like the idea of like he's like this Greek smuggler resistance guy. He's got these soldiers. They're really cool. There's a cool scene where they go into this warehouse to ascertain whether or not they have the ATAC system there, and this Locke, this villain that they've been tracking down, that has been responsible for paying the guy that killed her parents and all that. You have this really cool action sequence, a shootout there. I really enjoyed kind of the build up to the climb up to the hideout. For some reason, they're like up at the top of this giant cliff, but the climbing scenes were a lot of fun. A little bit of tension there. I do like the kind of atmosphere in this movie of those things. I wanted to say another positive before I kind of give my overall score is that I do think the stunt work in this movie is some of the best we've seen in the Bond film. But again, it's a lot of stuff we've seen before. They, were in kind of Italy, got the Winter Olympic type stuff. So we're seeing more of skiing, more of bobsled track, Iditarod type stuff. And it's like, um, what we saw in On Her Majesty's Secret Service, a little bit of what you saw in, the beginning of Spy Who Loved Me. We're just kind of back doing that again. And yeah, it's still fun and I enjoy it, but it's a lot of, okay, here's more of this that we've seen before. And it just kind of goes on a little too long. The movie does in general for me. So I, there was, I do not dislike this movie. So it will probably end up in my bottom just because of its score, but I don't hate it. But I also don't think it's as good as because we've kind of established that Double O Seven out of Double O Seven is like the best of the Bond films. Double O Six is pretty good, right up there. And Double O Five is kind of pretty good. Got has some flaws, but very enjoyable. I'm gonna have to give this one a Double O Four out of Double O Seven because it just doesn't know what it wants to be. And it's kind of a shame because I think it could have been one of the better Bond movies if it had done things differently. It couldn't decide the tone that it wanted to be. There is some stuff that's a little more brutal for Roger Moore era, um, but there's also a lot of goofy stuff in it that's typical of the Roger Moore era, so it just can't. Whereas like Spy Who Loved Me was very balanced. There is like no balance to this one. It's kind of all over the place. And I enjoyed it, but it was a little more tedious to get through. So I feel like I've been a little harsh on it, but that's kind of my feelings on For Your Eyes Only. Oh, but well, I'm gonna go ahead and mention it, even though I know you probably the ending scene with them on the boat and the parrot that her parents had talking to Margaret Thatcher. It's just absolutely stupid, but it's hilarious at the same time. It's a parrot talking to the prime minister. It's like, oh, Mr. Bond, thank you. It's just so stupid. I was sitting there shaking my head the whole time. And again, it's kind of he says he keeps her from killing Statos about revenge, and then all of a sudden, you know, Columbo throws a knife in his back, kills him. It's like, oh, okay. It's just a very frustrating movie to watch for that. But it is Bond. It does have some very enjoyable aspects to it, but again, I just kind of found myself very conflicted while watching it, and I can't recommend it as highly as some of the others.
Well, I'll go ahead and say it. 005. so I'm just a touch probably more than you,
Okay.
but that's not to say that I don't have a lot of the same frustrations as well. Like to mention from the jump, like John Glenn had been involved in the franchise for quite a while as an editor, including on Her Majesty's Secret Service,
Yeah.
which is kind of interesting that he touches on a lot of the same stuff that happened in that movie, or some parts of it at least, and bobsledding, for instance. But he was also an editor on the previous two movies in this episode.
Right.
So yeah, we're gonna get a lot more of John Glenn and see the different things that he brought to the franchise as a director as we go through a lot of the next several movies, as you mentioned. But yeah, the weird thing about For Your Eyes Only is that, which I know we both mentioned that we didn't remember a lot about it from previous viewings way back. It has some aspects to it that I really like a lot that I think could have made for quite an excellent movie, and I really wish it had that balance that it doesn't quite strike, because the parts that I like, I really like. I mean, I'm a big fan of Fiddler on the Roof, so like seeing Topple in this movie and his character is fantastic, and I'd like to see even more of that, honestly.
Oh yeah, I love this.
Yeah, I like Julian Glover, and I like him in this movie. There could be more of that. One of the biggest parts of the movie, though, is the whole aspect of revenge, and they miss
Right.
something incredibly huge. And like that opening sequence that you mentioned is a big part of that, because I like that opening sequence in a way because it's absurd and it has some incredible stunt work with the hanging on to the helicopter and so forth. Like that's just crazy cool. But the sequence itself, it's fun, but then you see the rest of the movie and realize they really missed something there. And it's the idea of revenge as a motivator, because Bond is spending all this time talking about like you don't need to go for revenge. It won't give you what you think it'll give you. Meanwhile, the whole opening sequence in the movie was him just like visiting the grave of his wife and then killing the guy who killed her.
Right.
And obviously they couldn't directly say that, but why couldn't they? Why did it have to necessarily be Blofeld? They could have. I mean, obviously you could argue, oh, they need to try for continuity, but do they really care about continuity
Right. Right.
in these movies? Like they don't really. So it could have been a different guy that killed his wife, and then they tied that into that as a dramatic motivator and made a different kind of sequence that fit into the rest of the movie, and then the movie is about revenge. That could actually be really cool, and instead you have this absurd opening, and then the rest of the movie basically ignores it,
Right.
but there's that thematic resonance like underneath it that's confusing now because of what we just saw. I don't know, like For Your Eyes Only has like that. I love that rock climbing sequence, which reminds me a lot of Free Solo, because I became, when I saw the documentary Free Solo, I got really addicted to watching a lot of climbing. Alex Honnold is incredible, incredible athlete. Watching him scale El Capitan and Free Solo was incredible athletic feat to watch and visually breathtaking. But watching this rock climbing in For As Only is just really fun sequence. And there's a lot of stuff like that. I had to mention though, like the boat sequence where they're underwater and there's the sharks. That sequence doesn't really make a lot of sense
No.
the way it plays out. The sharks seem to have zero interest in Bond,
Right.
and yet there's a villain that accidentally gets knocked off into the water and the sharks instantly attack him.
Right.
Like that doesn't make any sense at all how that plays out. But oh well. I, this movie has that kind of vibe going for it. Like I still enjoyed it. I guess maybe a touch more than you did, but at the same time, it is frustrating when there are these aspects in it that are thinking, "Wow, this could have been a terrific Bond movie with some of the people involved and a lot of the suggested storyline. If you really tied that into the storyline of On Her Majesty's Secret Service even more, if you actually made that a through line, that could be really interesting. I don't know, like my head just started suddenly went to a place where I imagined it actually being George Lazenby, and he got to make a sequel, and it was For Your Eyes Only. It
Right.
was more serious and more thought through, like it was a direct follow up. Like that, I don't know, that could be really interesting in a way. Like I don't know what that movie would look like exactly, but that could be interesting. Instead, it's the Roger Moore Bond with that storyline, and I think I've made it evident I like the Roger Moore Bond, but yeah, what we get here is not the perfect distillation of what that is, which is, I guess, not the best start for John Glenn's run as a director. But but there we are. It's worth pointing out too that and the movie costs twice as much as The Spy Who Loved Me, and I'm not exactly sure why. I mean, there's obviously some big stuff in the movie, but it doesn't feel as big.
No.
In a lot of ways, it doesn't. Yeah, it's just kind of a mixed bag of a movie. A movie I don't hate, but I wish could have been better. That's kind of where I fall down on it.
Yeah, that's definitely where I fall with it, and I think I'm a little harsher on it because of that, because it really could have been it really could have stood out. It really could have been something, but that you know the imbalance of it kind of keeps it from being really anything. But like you said, there's still a lot to be enjoyed about it. It's just that it could be so much better, and they kind of, stupidly didn't think about certain things like you mentioned or other. It's like, okay, don't take revenge, and then Cristados, was his partner, was Topol's partner, Colombo's partner at one time who betrayed him, and he takes revenge instead. So.
Let the
Uh,
men take revenge, please, woman.
yeah, yeah, that's the message of the movie. Pretty young women don't need to take revenge, but men can take it all the time. But I mean, obviously, that's not what they were going for. But it feels kind of silly that they missed their own point. I do think that John Glenn kind of gets revenge a little more accurate or uses it as a theme more accurately in a later film he does, which is License to Kill, which is actually his last film that he directs and the last of the Timothy Dalton films. So we won't talk about it for another couple of episodes, but I feel like eventually he kind of tackles that theme a lot more successfully. It feels like they wanted to try to do something, but they just didn't try hard enough, and it just kind of felt it's like they wanted to make it more brutal. They wanted to make it a little less um, outlandish, but they also didn't want to do that at the same time. So it's just very wishy washy. But again, there's some stuff I really do enjoy, and I don't know, just that's kind of where I land on it. I just it very much frustrated me that they couldn't just latch. If they wanted it to be silly, if they had just latched on to the silliness, I could have rode with it like Moonraker. Or if they wanted to be just the more completely more serious, I could have done that too. But it's just, it's a fine line there. You got to know what you're doing. You can't just have both mixed in together like that. It's like that balance of Spy Who Loved Me. They did that perfectly. It just feel it comes off like they didn't know what they were doing with that. And I know that most of these guys have worked on that movie, Spy Who Loved Me. So obviously they know what to do. But it just the finished product, what they did, it just didn't bring that about.
Well, and John Glenn was also new as a feature film director too.
That's true too.
So like you do have that aspect of it where maybe he needed to grow as a director, and we'll get to experience some of that as we watch these movies to see how he does or doesn't grow as a director. And
Yeah,
uh, and that's what's so frustrating too, is because they obviously were a huge franchise. They had options for all kinds of talent to write and direct these movies. And that's not a diss to who they have, but it's to say that if they really wanted to take it seriously, they could have buckled down and actually wrote an involved story and developed it and made it serious and made that turn.
right.
But it's almost like they didn't want to. I agree with that aspect. They did and they didn't want to scale back from the outlandishness because there's still too much of them not taking it seriously, and yet they are at the same time. And it's kind of a weird mishmash of those things. And part of that is tone, and the tone belongs to a director. So you get a new director in there, and that's also confusing. If you want people to take you seriously, not that it can't be a new director, but it's kind of weird to necessarily try that. You could have gone for something a little different. Heck, could have gone for a Spielberg, you know, if they were going to do that at the time. But no, yeah, that's I guess where we end up with For Your Eyes Only. It's this. I guess I'm hesitant to call it forgettable because it has some fantastic moments in it, but as an overall movie, it kind of. I guess it's easy in a way to see how it fell by the wayside.
I had watched it more recently than the other two, um, and I didn't remember much about it. Uh, so I think it doesn't stand out as much as some of these other films that we've talked about so far. And it's not necessarily forgettable, but it's not as iconic or memorable as some of the others. And a lot of that has to do just with the nature of it. It's very kind of a mixed bag. It's as far as these films go, it's one of it's a mediocre Bond film, and it's kind of lukewarm. And so it doesn't stand out to me as much as even Moonraker, which a lot of people might view as one of the worst, but it's also just kind of it is very much what it is trying to be, which is just a silly romp, but it embraces that. I feel like For Your Eyes Only kind of has an identity crisis. Doesn't know exactly what it wants to be.
Yeah, and that makes all the difference in the world. Tone and knowing what you're trying to do in the first place. But on that note, I guess it's fair time to talk about our next three movies, which is going to include a rather interesting break that we've referenced a couple times in this episode, in the fact that there were legal disputes that prevented them from referencing Spectre or actually making that Blofeld at the beginning of For Your Eyes Only. We're actually using Blofeld as the villain in Spy Who Loved Me. That is the result of our first non canon Bond movie that we're going to discuss. But first, I guess there's a little bit of debate we could have about where to start, but the first one that came out was Octopussy. In the exact same year as Octopussy, and then Never Say Never Again. And what an interesting juxtaposition that is. But what's especially interesting is part of the legal dispute was that they could make their own Bond movie and non-canon, but it had to be Thunderball because that's where the legal disputes all started on rights issues. What an interesting turn in a way. For so many reasons, they get the opportunity to remake the movie that we've disliked the most so far. That also was part of Connery's frustrations. And somehow, in all of that, they convinced Sean Connery to come back and to play James Bond once more and Never Say Never Again. And meanwhile, Roger Moore is still very much Bond in the canon movies with Octopussy. I got to be honest, like I have seen Never Say Never Again. I do not remember much about it, except that I don't think I dislike it in a way that I dislike Thunderblaw. I guess we'll see for sure, but
I think I've seen it, but I don't remember if I've seen it all the way through or if I just kind of saw it piecemeal a long time ago.
well, now we'll get a feel for it.
Exactly. You know, Octopussy, I have seen a few times, and I do remember it a little bit more, especially more than some of the ones we watched this time around. I'm not sure where I'm going to fall on it, so it's still going to be fun to go back and watch it again. I like the idea of watching it in that order, watching Octopussy, then watching Never Say Never Again, and then we will ultimately finish the Roger Moore era with A View to a Kill.
Basically, we're ending Connery and Moore. Yeah.
The farewell episode to the two most tenured Bonds. So it's going to be yet another interesting lineup here, and I'm very much looking forward to it.
No, I'm definitely looking forward to it as well. I will say about Octopussy that I don't remember it distinctly, but I remember the last time I watched it, and it's been a long time because I actually think it was at my grandma's house years ago, probably more than a decade ago. And but point is, I remember thinking, oh, it's the one called Octopussy, and how can this be one of the good ones? And I remember having fun.
Right.
So I don't know if that's going to stay true or not. What I also remember, though, and I remember this more distinctly, is that I do not like A View to a Kill. And that's in spite of the fact that it has Chris Walken and Grace Jones,
Right.
who could, in theory, be in a really good Bond movie.
And and arguably one of the best Bond songs,
Well, sure.
uh, which we will which we will get to next episode. But yes, View to a Kill is also not remembered very fondly by me. Uh, the last time I did watch it, which was actually 3 years ago, because it was when Roger Moore passed away, and I figure since this is the Roger Moore episode where all three films of Roger Moore, go ahead and mention that we just hit the 3 year anniversary of his passing. Time he that year that he did die, I actually watched. I don't know why I chose View to a Kill, but I did, and I remember not thinking as it was as bad as I had previously, but I don't remember what changed my mind. So, well, I don't know if it was a fluke or if it was just because it was kind of in the mindset of his passing or what, or if I found some qualities in it I didn't know were there, but we'll see. Because again, that's been 3 years. So some time and events have passed in my life since then, so it'll be interesting to see where we fall on that one too. But we're kind of coming to the close of an era in general because after more, the bonds we get are all very extremely different from each other. So it'll be kind of interesting to say farewell to these two kind of titans that Moore and just Connery doing one more before we start getting into Dalton and Brosnan and ultimately Daniel Craig, and just see how different this character has been portrayed over the years, and that's been part of the fun. Especially, I think Roger Moore, out of all of these guys, I probably watched his films the least because there are a few I've seen a lot, but overall, I haven't seen his films as much, and it's part of it's because like when I was younger, I wasn't really into Roger Moore as much as Connery or at the time Brosnan, um, because Brosnan was as we mentioned, kind of the bond of our coming of age as preteens and teenagers. As I've gotten older, I've appreciated more in watching his films this run, this time. I just, I've enjoyed them. We kind of mentioned last episode that they were going to be a lot more inconsistent from then on, but really that was only true with For Your Eyes Only, because I feel like Spy Who Loved Me was great, and Moonraker was a lot of fun. Um, so that inconsistency didn't hit as fast as I thought it was going to. So it's going to be interesting to watch this last stretch of more movies.
Yeah, I think this will be really curious, especially you saying that you liked A View to a Kill and you've seen it, or seemed to enjoy it the last time you watched it, and you've seen it more recently than I have. So now I'm curious as well. I mean, not like I already wasn't. Of course, it's been a while since I've seen any of these movies, so all of it's going to be a little bit of a curiosity to see exactly how I feel and how we both feel about these movies as we close a couple different eras in some really fascinating ways. No, like what I think is interesting about A View to a Kill, and we'll see where we land for a fact when we watch it, but it's the idea that I think at least next you got Roger Moore, Timothy Dalton, and Pierce Brosnan, and I think before we've watched them, that all three of them end with their own worst Bond movies,
Right.
and that's an interesting trend and a frustrating trend that I hope and expect Daniel Craig to break.
I I hope as well. I hope that as well. But we will see. We will see.
We shall. Well, but I suppose for this time, we will close this episode, and thanks everyone for tuning in. See you next time here on Movie Marathon Mood.